When you think about growing your own food, you probably picture a big backyard, raised beds, and a lot of money spent on supplies. But I want to show you something very different. I'm standing on a small balcony with no yard at all, and by the end of this video, this empty space will be a productive container garden that cost me less than $50 to set up. If you've been putting off gardening because you're renting, short on space, or on a budget, this step-by-step guide is for you. The very first thing I did was look at this balcony the way a plant would. Instead of rushing out to buy pots and soil, I spent a day paying attention to the light. I watched where the sun actually hits, and for how long. You'll want to do the same, even if you're just glancing out a few times during the day. I noticed that one side of my balcony gets direct sun for most of the morning, while the other side is much more shaded and only gets bright indirect light. That told me exactly where to put sun-loving herbs and veggies, and where to reserve space for more shade-tolerant plants or just a cozy chair. I also measured the depth of the balcony and the height of the railing, so I wouldn't buy containers that were either too bulky or too shallow to be useful. With a rough plan in mind, I made my shopping list with a strict $50 ceiling. To keep this realistic, I focused on basics that almost anyone can find locally. For containers, I skipped the fancy designer pots and grabbed 3 sturdy, food-safe buckets from the hardware store. They were only a few dollars each and large enough to support good root systems. For soil, I chose a lightweight potting mix made for containers instead of heavy garden soil. Container plants depend completely on what you give them, so this is where I spent the biggest share of the budget. But it's still surprisingly affordable when you're only filling a few pots. To get faster results in a small space, I picked up a few herb starts, plants like basil, parsley, and thyme, that I know I'll actually cook with. Finally, I added a simple watering can and a small packet of flower seeds to add some color around the edges. When I totaled everything up at the register, I was still under $50. Back on the balcony, it was time to turn supplies into an actual garden. The buckets I bought already had some drainage, but for container gardening, some usually isn't enough. I flipped each container over and drilled a few extra holes in the bottom, so excess water can escape easily. If you don't have a drill, you can carefully use a hammer and nail, or choose containers that already have plenty of holes. Inside each container, I placed a scrap of mesh or even a piece of broken terracotta over the holes. This simple trick keeps soil from washing out while still letting water drain freely. Then I poured in the potting mix, stopping just a couple inches below the rim. I fluffed the soil with my hands to make sure it stayed loose. Compacted soil makes it harder for roots to grow and for water to soak in evenly. Before I tuck any plants into their new homes, I want to pause for a second. If you're already imagining how your own balcony or patio could look with a few containers like these, this is the perfect time to subscribe to the channel and give us a like so you don't miss the rest of this balcony transformation series. I'm going to be sharing exactly what I plant, how much I harvest from this little space, and how I troubleshoot problems along the way. So if turning a small, boring balcony into a green oasis on a budget sounds like your kind of project, hit subscribe and let's keep growing together. Now, let's get these containers planted. I gently squeezed each herb out of its plastic nursery pot, trying not to tug on the stems. You'll often see the roots circling around the bottom when a plant has been in its pot for a while. I used my fingers to tease those roots apart just a bit, encouraging them to spread into the fresh soil. I made a small hole in the center of the container, set the plant in at the same depth it was growing before, and pressed the soil around it to remove any big air pockets. In one larger container, I combined a few herbs together, a taller variety in the center and lower-growing bushier ones around the edges. Once the plants were in place, it was time for their first drink. The first watering is all about settling the soil and helping the roots make good contact. I watered slowly until I saw water start to run out of the bottom of the containers. You don't want to just sprinkle the top. You want the moisture to reach all the way down so the roots are encouraged to grow deep instead of staying near the surface. After that initial soak, my rule of thumb is simple. I check the top inch of soil with my finger. If it's dry, it's time to water again. If it's still moist, I wait another day. On a hot balcony, that might mean watering every day in summer, but in cooler weather, it could be every few days. Placement is another small detail that makes a huge difference. I slid the sun-loving herbs toward the sunniest side of the balcony, leaving a little space between containers so air can flow and leaves can dry after watering. Plants that prefer a bit less intensity went closer to the wall, where they still get plenty of light but not as much scorching midday sun. I also made sure everything was within easy reach from the door. If you have to squeeze past furniture or reach awkwardly over a railing every time you want to water, you're more likely to skip it, and container gardens dry out faster than in-ground beds. Over the next few weeks, these simple containers will fill in and start to look more and more like a mini oasis. Herbs will send out new shoots as I start snipping them for meals, and those inexpensive flower seeds around the edges will sprout and add pops of color. The key to keeping everything thriving is consistency, rather than perfection. I make a quick habit of stepping outside with my morning coffee, taking 10 seconds to look at the leaves, feel the soil, and check for any pests. Catching tiny problems early, like a bit of yellowing or a few aphids, keeps them from ever turning into something big and discouraging. What I love most about this setup is how flexible it is. Maybe you don't like basil but you love mint and chives. Maybe you want one container of salad greens instead of flowers. The exact plants can change, but the basic structure stays the same. A few affordable containers with good drainage, quality potting mix, thoughtful placement based on your light, and a simple watering routine you can actually stick to. For under $50, you're not just buying plants. You're creating a little daily ritual and a space that feels more alive every time you step outside. If you decide to try a balcony container gardening setup like this, I'd really love to see what you create. Tell me in the comments what you're planning to grow and what your balcony or patio looks like now. When your containers are planted, share your progress. Your ideas might inspire someone else who thinks their space is too small to bother. And if this step-by-step guide helped you feel more confident about starting a garden on a budget, give us a like and go ahead and subscribe, because this is just the beginning. I'll be sharing updates on how these plants grow, what I harvest, and more small space garden projects you can try next. You don't need a big yard or a big budget to grow something beautiful. Your garden can start right here, in a single container on your balcony.